Welcome to the first ever event for the Australian chapter of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. And we are starting off with a cracker, so the ISO20400 Masterclass. It's a deep dive into the Sustainable Procurement Standard and the best place to start if you're looking to the foundations of sustainable procurement. And for those who are a little bit more progressed in the journey, it's a great way to check if you are progressing and how you're progressing against the best practice and the standard. So, look, my name's Sujata. The other person that you will get to know through the SPP events is Nicola Lane. Nicola, if you just give a bit of a wave. Fantastic. And we are co-chairs of the Australian chapter of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. We are really excited to bring you a pretty incredible lineup for our first ever event. And I will go through a little bit more of an introduction as we drop into the sessions, but we have Tanya Harris, Principal Consultant from Edge Impact, and pretty much the expert on ISO 2400 in Australia. We also have Jason Lockwood, Head of Procurement and Accounts at Bingo Industries, Nick Comito, previously Global GM of Sustainability at Toll Group and Head of Sustainability at Bingo, and Catherine Alves, who is the sustainability specialist at Lion and leads the Sustainable Procurement Program. Now, I would just like to also acknowledge, most of us are joining from Australia, although I think we've got a few international participants as well. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands that we're meeting on today. As I mentioned before, I am in very sunny Brisbane, Meanjin. I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to First Nations people who are joining us on the call today. I thank them for their continued care and custodianship of this land. And I just also wanted to quickly touch on, for those of you who might be based in Queensland, you might have seen the news this morning that the incoming state government recently elected has elected to pause the Queensland Truth-Telling and Healing Inquiry, which has been a really devastating decision for a lot of the First Nations community here in Queensland. And I know that that team are in the process of understanding exactly what that means for the inquiry and the path to treaty. But as part of that, I guess I just wanted to highlight that, there's a lot of work to be done in the fight for First Nations equality and justice. And we, as sustainable procurement professionals, have a really important role to play as allies. So very quickly, we've got just the agenda for today. So I'll give you a little bit of an introduction, Nicola and I, to SPP, what it is, what the Australian chapter means, and then we're going to drop into the meat of the masterclass today. So an overview of ISO 2400 with Tanya. We're also going to do a little bit of a self-assessment through this process. So the idea behind these masterclasses was not just to be a webinar, but to really give everybody who was joining the call some practical elements. So activities, workshops, that's the sort of thing that we're going to be moving forward with. And then just to bring all of that together, so, once you've done that self-assessment, once you've started to embed some of the components, what does that mean and what does that look like? We're going to have two incredible case studies, one from Bingo, one from Lion, and a little bit of time at the end for some Q&A. And just a reminder, I guess just a little bit of housekeeping, in joining the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, we are a community of volunteers. We are procurement professionals who are collaborating, but there's just a few key rules that we need to take into account when we're going through this. You can see them there. So again, the basics around antitrust, just want a little reminder that this applies, not just during these sessions, but how we will interact, in our community groups through LinkedIn and through some of the conversations that we're having. And there's a little link there to the Sustainable Procurement Pledge netiquette, as it says. Also, just just wanted to add, if you have any questions or any thoughts as we go through the session, feel free to pop it in the chat or raise your hands. We'll be keeping an eye out for any questions, but we do have some time for Q&A, as I mentioned, at the end of the session. So the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, it might be new to a few people here, and we wanted to share just a little bit about how it started and what it is. So essentially, it began in 2019 when Thomas Udison and Bertrand Concoret, who were CPOs at Bayer and Henkel respectively, they joined forces with the idea to create a grassroots movement and a call to action amongst procurement professionals, because we all know that we have, through procurement, an immense power to make a difference in our world. Procurement can change the world. That's what they saw, and that was the movement that they set out to build. So, what is the pledge? Why is it called the Sustainable Procurement Pledge? The idea was that in joining, you make a pledge, you commit to 5 principles. The first, that you will stand up for people and our planet, that together with others, we will change the world, that we will start with ourselves, that we will share our knowledge and listen to others. And I know everybody who's on this call, our speakers, everybody who's been working in procurement, we have incredible knowledge to share. And the final one, that we will leave the right legacy. So the goal of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge is to have 1 million procurement professionals commit to the pledge. 1 million procurement professionals around the globe. Now, this is the number that creates the critical mass. This is the number that, the pledge has identified that will tip us into creating more sustainable outcomes through procurement. And we're already doing this in a lot of ways. This is one of the mechanisms that will enable us to gain a little bit more of that momentum, to collaborate, to share knowledge. And with that as well, 75% of those 1 million members, we want to confirm that they are making more sustainable sourcing decisions because of their SPP engagement. So again, it might be because of the knowledge that they've gained. It might be because of the changes that they're able to make in their organisation as a result. So on the website, you'll find a little bit more information about SPP and the chapters. The way it works when you take the pledge and join, of course, the SPP is volunteer-led and it's divided into chapters. So what you'll find are country chapters, of which Australia, we are the new chapter, or one of the new chapters rather, for 2024. You'll find topic chapters, which take a little bit more of a deep dive and a closer look into particular sustainable procurement topics that are relevant to the industry. So things like emerging technologies, biodiversity and nature, scope 3, human rights, supplier diversity. They're some of the topic chapters that we have. And industry-specific chapters. Now, there's 3 at the moment: pharma and life sciences, public procurement, and hospitality. So each of these chapters hold events, they share information to their community, all of which you can find online. So what are we aiming to do in Australia? So we are very early days, and everybody on the call, thank you. You have joined the first ever event for the Australian chapter. But we also know there's thousands of people in procurement in Australia, all of whom have really incredible knowledge to share. So you can help us to build that community. If you haven't already, you can join this chapter on LinkedIn. You find the address there and we will drop it into the chat as well. You can join the pledge. So if you visit spp.earth, you will be able to take the pledge, make that commitment, have access to, all of the incredible videos, masterclasses, speakers, communities, and get involved. Share knowledge. When you join the LinkedIn group, feel free to post, chat. We will provide a little bit more information on what's coming. we've got some pretty big plans for the Australian chapter, some of which involves more masterclasses. So again, more deep dive sessions that give you some practical tools to walk away with to start to build your sustainable procurement programs, some research that we're looking at, and a really exciting one, a mentoring program that's designed at building our capability around sustainable procurement and delivering better outcomes. So you will hear more about all of those in due course. If you want to know more, please reach out to either Nicola or myself after this call. So with that, I wanted to now hand over to Tanya Harris. Now, I'll let her introduce herself, but anyone who has been working in sustainable procurement for a while will know Tanya's name. She has been pioneering sustainable procurement in Australia for more than 2 decades. But most importantly, for those of you on the call, she is a founding member and contributor to the ISO 20400 Sustainable Procurement Guidance. So there's no one better place to tell us exactly what it is and how it works. Tanya, over to you.
Thank you so much. I think you just politely called me a little bit old, and I am totally fine with that because that's absolutely true. So Tanya Harris, a recovering traditional procurement professional. I think it's been about 13 years since I've done a normal negotiation, and very proud to build equity and justice into everything that I do professionally. I'm the Sustainable Procurement and Supply Chain Principal for Edge Impact. We're a dedicated sustainability consultancy, if you don't know us, and I have been involved in many things, including the ISO consultation for the Modern Slavery Act with Sujata on the Australian Circular Economy Procurement Working Group. And I have lots of opinions around this. I think this is really interesting. So please let me share some of my joy and passion around sustainable procurement, and also the role that ISO 2400 plays globally, but also how you can be empowered to deliver against the Sustainable Development Goals and outcomes. So just to kick off, I'm sure everybody is more than aware of the Sustainable Development Goals and the fact that there is a specific SDG that is related to sustainable public procurement. Whether we're public or private procurement, I think it's really important to note that it was considered an absolute core contributor to being able to achieve sustainable outcomes. And ISO 2400 was in fact created around a similar timeframe to be able to address the growing concerns and demands for sustainability through the procurement process, given the leverage that we are able to deliver. Some of those things were around the need for guidance on how to incorporate environmental and social responsibility into procurement practices, how we align procurement to corporate and organisational sustainability goals, which is essential for success, how we can better manage risks throughout our supply chain and unethical practices. And this is in advance of modern slavery acts around the world. Economic pressures. So through doing sustainable procurement, often we're looking at how we can reduce waste, optimise resources both internally and natural, and achieve cost savings in the long term. There's also been a significant increase in national and international regulations and policies, which has not slowed down, and in fact, we're likely to see more. And lastly, there is the increased transparency and accountability of social and environmental aspects that should be transparent in the procurement process. So ISO 2400 really delivers a structured approach for organisations to be able to integrate those sustainable procurement practices. And as you can see here, SDG 12 actually enables significant other SDGs. And so if your organisation is reporting progress against the Sustainable Development Goals, there might be a couple here that could be integrated into that external reporting. Next slide, please. So here, this is the first time I've ever really considered the context in which the frame or the standard was developed. And I actually thought it was really interesting when I reflected, being around in the 2000s and considering sustainability, we were using the terms corporate social responsibility. We'd only just seen the introduction of the UN Global Compact and GRI, the voluntary sustainability reporting frameworks. And in fact, organisations were only just starting to do external sustainability reporting. Then in 2009, we saw a globally significant event. It was the failure of the 2009 UN Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen, which I happened to be at as a part of the Australian business delegation. And while it failed to deliver a legally binding agreement, it actually became a pivotal moment in actually redirecting climate diplomacy. It galvanised businesses, NGOs and governments to collaborate together for the first time. And it also made, I think, more generally, a key awareness that we couldn't rely solely on national governments to deliver climate outcomes, that we actually needed to be able to take action across all actors and businesses globally. And it actually set the foundation for the Paris Agreement in 2015. So then while that was going on, there was work actually to deliver and develop the ISO 26000 social responsibility guidance. And still we're talking that older, somewhat antiquated language around social responsibility. And that was published in 2010. That took 4 years to develop, and it was actually largely seen as an impractical tool for business to be able to implement against. But what it did do is it codified the 7 core subjects of sustainability. So now we had a globally agreed definition of what sustainability integrated, and that's also reflected in ISO 20400. And it was for the first time really aiming to direct businesses to contribute to sustainable development from a single bottom line consideration to triple bottom line accountability. So it was the first standard in the world to do that. Rio 20 Plus, there's the developing sustainable development goals, which replaced the I don't know if anyone will remember the Millennium Development Goals, which were formally adopted in 2015. And then that set the agenda to 2030. And right now we're almost halfway through the decade of action in achieving those. And that is where the concept of the sustainable procurement ISO standard was really grounded, was how do we increase action? How do we take meaningful action? And procurement and the procurement process was considered one of the key levers to be able to drive towards sustainable development goals. It was recognised at that multilateral level, and it was endorsed by ISO to actually establish the International Committee. 2014, also 2013, I'm sure any of you that have been working for a while in Australia would be familiar with Jean-Louis Hay from X-Action Sustainability and KPMG. He came over to Australia, and Jana Quintance-James, who is David Jones and the iconic sustainability manager, head of global sustainability. The three of us spent 6 months conducting a national stakeholder engagement process to be able to establish Australia's involvement in developing the ISO standard. We were successful, and we were able to go to the 2014 second international meeting. And then there were subsequently another 5 international meetings. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to 3 of those. And they were really tough while they were in fabulous locations. And one of those was in Sydney. We were, it was 5 days of up to 14 hours a day of negotiation, representing our national position, representing the procurement profession, and also some vested interests through some of the oil states. So it was like a little mini UN convention. We were delighted to agree and finalise our last session in Rio de Janeiro at the end of 2016, and we saw ISO 20400 published in 2017 and then identically adopted in Australia as an AS standard in 2018. It should also be noted that while we might be procurement professionals, there isn't actually a global standard for procurement. So this is actually the first of its kind as well. The Australian Technical Committee met for 14 times over those 3.5 years, and it was literally word for word review and negotiation. So there was 52 countries involved. There was 38 very active participating members. Some were louder than others, and you'd be very proud of your Australian delegation because we were one of the most forthright. And there was also 14 observing members. You can see here that there was some significant and very high profile liaisons through the EU, the International Air Transport Association. Particularly proud of the ITUC, given how many millions of workers around the world they represent. We had 3 or 4 UN agencies, the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, the Independent International Organisation for Certification. Looks like a little bit of what our current corporate reporting alphabet soup looks like, right? But we also had specific liaisons from the ISO Environmental Management Technical Committee, Anti-Bribery Management System, and the Risk Management Technical Committee. And also that's because ISO 20400 redefined what risk management looks like within both ISOs. So talking not just about risks, but risks and opportunities. So it was groundbreaking in that context too. You can see at the time, 65% of the world population, 85% of the world's GDP, and also 85% of the world's carbon emissions. Thank you. So why is it handy? And I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail. There's plenty of online and happy to follow up. But it's actually structured into 4 key sections, and those sections are related to the audience. So the first section around fundamentals is an overview of sustainable procurement. It describes the scope, what the 7 core subjects and principles are, and the why. But that is kind of intended for all audiences. Whereas when we look at the integrating sustainability into the procurement policy and strategy, we're now starting to talk about senior management and executives within your organisation. So it talks about, why the strategic integration into procurement, what are the success factors, documenting the intention, the direction and the priorities so that everybody actually understands what sustainable procurement is and why we're doing it. And it also talks to, again, that alignment with broader organisational sustainability goals and objectives, which is really essential that we're speaking the same language as the rest of the business. The procurement function piece, which is around the success factors and techniques to be able to embed and implement sustainable procurement with a view to continuous improvement. And this is more for procurement management. So how do you actually set your function up for success? And then lastly, my favourite piece, I did lead the international working group to develop this particular section, which is how to actually integrate sustainability into the existing procurement process. And while I've summarised it there as plan, source, manage, it goes into more detail around lots of elements. This is really helpful for anybody that is involved in the procurement contract or supply life cycle. Something to pick up and go, okay, well, I understand the principles of how I need to apply whatever is contextualized in my business and what I'm doing right now from a category strategy, and I can consider from plan through to end of life, end of contract.
I really like that slide, Tanya. That's really clear.
Oh, thanks, Nick. Thanks. And if you wanted any more additional information, the international, a few of us from the international delegations, there is a free website which is called ISO20400.org. You can access this this particular guidance there. And this was, again, an Australian delegation initiative. We wanted to contextualise the 7 core subjects, which you can see there: organisational governance, environment, human rights, labour practices, etc., into an Australian context. And we also wanted to provide some insights and case studies around what does good look like and what does a disaster that's been publicly called out in the media look like for each of those. Because as procurers, we know that one of the core challenges we face is not just trying to integrate this into our lean time that we have available, but it's also about the engagement and buy-in that we're looking for from the rest of the business. So this is a free resource if you haven't already seen it. Adoption so far. So we had 52 countries involved. We again, on the website, we know that there's 17 national standards bodies that have formally adopted ISO 2400 into their own national standards. 30 countries have it for sale through their national standards bodies. And we also know that we're now up to 188 different countries having interactions with the website, the content, the resources, and implementation of sustainable procurement practices, which I think is remarkable in the time since it's been published, and we're really proud of that. It's really hard to be able to quantify how many different standards and frameworks nationally, globally, and also from a business perspective, ISO 2400 underpins, but some of the ones that I'm the most familiar with, I thought I'd pop here. So actually all state governments actually have ISO 2400 aligned procurement policies, with the expectation that businesses that are looking to work with the government are also aligned with the principles. We know at the Commonwealth government level, Kath and the team are fantastic and have a fabulous sustainable procurement guidelines, which are free and aligned with ISO 2400. We know particularly in property and construction, some of the key national frameworks are also ISO 2400 aligned. So there is a specific Green Star responsible credit. GBCA also is aligned to it, the Infrastructure Sustainability Council, and we also know, if we are reviewing the modern slavery guidance that was published to support businesses implementing against the Act, that it references ISO 2400 as a handy guide to understand how to be able to implement. It's also at the international level, so CDP, supply chain, Carbon Disclosure Project, voluntary reporting against the supply chain components is ISO 2400 aligned, EcoVadis, Bureau Veritas, and the Global Reporting Initiatives, just to name a few. But I think perhaps my favourite, though, for different reasons, is the fact that the United Nations actually measures progress against SDG 12.7.1, the implementation of national policies aligned for sustainable procurement with ISO 2400 as well. So it's a heavy hitter. We did all right. And I think it's also really important to note that it is not a certification, it is a guidance document. When we went through, so ISO has a process every 5 years. You need to review, decide whether or not to maintain, to revise, or to throw it out and do a new one. So in 2022, the national bodies around the world have voted to maintain as is for the time being. So it's still a guidance. There is no certification. If you do see anyone claiming certification, please let us know. But it is likely in 2027 that it will be revised, updated, and we may look to actually drive aspects for certification. And there's two kind of camps when it comes to this. One is certification, you know, it's assurable, verified, trusted, it's a risk reduction, it's consistently applied, you know what you're getting. And it's also easier to be able to incorporate into bids and tenders as a preference for your supply chains. But from a guidance perspective, and why, you know, currently it is so well adopted, is that it's actually very flexible. So it provides those concepts and the sustainability topics, but it allows you to be able to contextualize that to your organisation's ambition, maturity, and goals and targets. So aspects of the guidance may be able to be certified. So plan, source, manage, we know that's a standardised process. However, there may be other elements which we'll test when we do the self-assessment in a TIC that may not so readily apply to being able to be certified. So when it's time for review, it's likely I'll be involved in the national stakeholder engagement again. So please add your voice to what your organisation's preference is. 10 seconds off 20 minutes. Okay, so, no, you go. I had a timer. I could talk about it for a while. What I will hand over to Sebastian, our fabulous sustainable procurement senior, because he helped me. I'm not that great with Slido, but ultimately what I wanted to do was to give you the opportunity to self-assess against the standard. And we'll hear some case studies in a TIC around an assessment process that some of our favourite organisations have gone through. But this is something that you can practically take back and give you an idea on where you can prioritise your efforts. So I'll be quiet now.
Thank you, Tanya. So basically, if everyone could just scan the QR code with your phone or in any device, or go to the URL link that is there, that'd be fantastic, and we can start the self-assessment. There's a couple of questions that we're going to go through, and we can go to the next slide. Yeah, and we'll start the poll. So basically, you have to rank yourself from 1 to 5, and you can see the first question, or the first area of sustainable of the ISO Sustainable Procurement, is understanding the fundamentals. So if your organization has a policy or strategy that reflects material sustainability impacts in your supply chain or organizational, to drive procurement. So basically you can score 5 if your policy and strategy covers environmental, social, and economic procurement issues. 3, like if you have some materiality sustainability impacts, but are reflected, but not all of them. And 1 is like you have no organizational policy and strategy, or it's a very generic one. So you can see in the screen how you rank against your peers as well. But also it's interesting to see that some are very advanced while other ones are just at the beginning of the journey, which is not bad. It's just that there's like you can learn from different peers. Well, I can see that most of the people are in number 3, so everyone has some materiality issues and that are being reflected, but maybe not covering all issues of sustainable procurement in general. It's a great starting point to be at. If we go to the next one. Yeah, excellent. So still with fundamentals, do you have a policy or a strategy that aligns with the principles of existing due diligence and in your extended supply chains? So 5 would be if your policy or strategy clearly expresses how to identify, assess, and prevent, mitigate ESG issues or sustainability issues, while 1 would be like there's no reference to the diligence in your policy. All right, so in this one, we are at the beginning. So the concepts of due diligence are not expressed completely, or some of them are expressed or not. and some of them are partially included, or there's not a lot of reference to due diligence, which is interesting to see how we are sitting in the fundamentals. As Tanya was explaining, fundamentals is basically your guiding line for sustainable procurement. So if you don't have this in place, it's complicated to guide your team, your procurement team, if you don't have guidance from the top. So go to the next one.
This is 3 of 20. We might need to.
Yeah, okay, I'll go faster. Okay. Does your organization policy and strategy reflect material sustainability impacts? So 5 would be the policy and strategy covers all aspects of sustainability, while 1 is there is no organizational policy or strategy. Interesting divide between like ones that are just at the beginning of the journey and some that are very advanced in the journey. We'll go to the next one then. Okay, so we go to the second one, that's integrating sustainability into your organizational procurement policy and strategy. So the other one was the guiding principles. Now is how are you integrating? So are clear accountabilities for sustainable procurement established in your organization? Okay, so some that are at the beginning, there's a couple that are very mature in that area. I would encourage you to chat to each other. That would be great to get insights from the ones that are a bit more mature. Next one. Okay. Do you review sustainability performance with your key stakeholders? Or is it something that is said that we do, but it's only but it's not review? Oh, so I think in this one, it's important to have a chat between sustainability and procurement. And if they're not talking to each other, as we can see for many of you, it'd be interesting to or recommended to start having those conversations. Next one. Do you have a formal commitment to sustainable procurement from top management? So is it like written down in a public forum that you are committed to sustainable procurement? Okay, so the majority, they have commitments, but are all internal documents, and there are a few that have external documents out there. It's important to have that for accountability, have it externally facing possible, especially with your clients. Okay, so now it's for enabling people, like do the job descriptions and objectives and plans for individuals who are responsible for procuring the goods and services include sustainable procurement. So do they have in their role sustainable procurement written anywhere? Okay. Well, I guess for all the ones that are don't have sustainable procurement elements in the job descriptions, it's nice, like it's comforting to see that everyone's in the same step of the journey at the moment. Okay, can we go to the next one, please? Do you have SMART sustainable procurement objectives and goals for individuals, and are those goals aligned to the organizational priorities? Oh, okay, this is very interesting. We have some people at the beginning of the journey, but like a lot also very mature. So it'd be like there's no one in the middle. Very interesting. Okay, can we go to the next one? So individuals that are responsible for procurement, do you have supportive culture? Like, do you help these individuals that are responsible for procurement know about sustainability? So do you get your sustainability teams to talk to your procurement teams? Basically, that's the question.
I'd love to do a global project to see how much businesses invest in their procurement teams, because to me, I think there's a direct correlation to sustainability outcomes. this is one of my passion areas.
I think that's an easy step that you can take home and start using is get sustainability to talk to procurement. And I see that the maturity is not there. So it's an easy step, like get those conversations starting. Next one, please.
And a shameless plug for the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. It's one of the ways in which you can help to build some knowledge, and we can help the community as well.
So 3.3 is identifying and engaging stakeholders. Do you identify your internal and external sustainable procurement stakeholders, and are you engaging with them?
I think modern slavery statement reporting, if you're not doing it now, it's both sustainable procurement and also worthwhile for protecting vulnerable people.
Yeah. Okay, we got to half of them. So I'm going to ask to go to the next one. Besides just identifying stakeholders, do you engage with supply chains to deliver sustainability?
Particularly small, medium enterprise.
Yes, can we go to the next one, please? Is sustainable procurement, and this is governing procurement, integrating in your procurement governance process? Perfect. Everyone's a bit at the beginning of the journey. Oh, that's a mixed order. Sorry about that. Do you engage with other external stakeholders like governments, industry bodies? I guess many of you that are here, it's a shameless plug as well, but if you're here, probably you're trying to engage with external stakeholders as well. So I hope that there's more 5 than 1s in this one. Okay, so 3.4 is setting sustainable procurement priorities. So have you taken the time to identify sustainable procurement priorities, specifically selected your key spend categories, which ones you will have the most impact, and which issues are you going to try to target based on that? I think this is a very important step to take if you want to have impact. Is you need to understand where you are going to have impact. We cannot fix everything, and organizations cannot address all issues regarding sustainability. So if you focus your efforts, you might have a better impact and decision and alignment to sustainable procurement than just trying to do everything at the same time.
Yeah, to be honest, I think that's worth a masterclass on its own.
Have you defined metrics and performance indicators that that you require from your internal functions? And the most important part of the question is, like, you've defined these metrics. Have you told people that are making these decisions that they have these metrics?
The old "you can't manage what you don't measure" conversation, isn't it?
Do you collect the data, like performance management from your functions, and do you use this data to inform decisions and to manage. I would ask or add a little bit, like, is the data that you are collecting the data that you require to have the impact?
And very strongly related to the new mandatory climate disclosure. So scope 3 is coming. It will need to be assured it's all our supply chain.
Don't scare people, Tanya.
Okay, and this is about grievance mechanisms. It's very, if you're already doing it, modern slavery reporting, you must have this already in place, but do you have an effective grievance mechanism for your supply chain?
And how do you measure effectiveness?
That's another masterclass by itself, but
sorry.
But well, you can see that there's a lot of maturity in this space, and I'm assuming that the ones that don't have that maturity yet is because they haven't been forced to do modern slavery reporting, because that is one of the mandatory criteria to have there. So like maybe small to medium enterprises that might want to continue. Okay. Have you integrated sustainability into the procurement process? So similar to what I was asking before, have you identified the percentage of your spend or products or services that have sustainability risk? Have you done a heat map and to include risks and opportunities that you can address in sustainability? And can you align that to your strategic sustainability priorities company-wide?
Particularly contract management process. Are you contracting claims? How are you managing and reporting it?
Because your planning process enables the integration of material sustainability risk into category strategy. So basically, you have gone all the way up from company-wide policies to category management strategy specific for each categories. And this distribution is what we would expect to see with the previous answers, where there's not a maturity. This is like a very mature part, and it's usually the last steps of the alignment to ISO. So that's understandable. And the last one, but not least one, does your sourcing process enable the management of material sustainability risk? So basically, do you know which sourcing categories or sourcing categories of products that you have the biggest impacts? Do you know, can you manage that? Is it already, you have the process to do that?
And are you set up for success to deliver it?
And so beginning of maturity, that's good. I will then pass the microphone to, I think, Jason and Nick, which have had this experience. We worked with them 3-4 years ago at the start of their journey, and now they have gone very far away. And I'll stop stealing your thunder. Go, please.
Yes, and thank you so much, Tanya, for taking us through that. I think that's being able to walk away from this session and think about some of the answers to those questions, and it was a bit of an eye-opener for me as well. I've joined a new organization recently, and having that self-assessment process kind of gives you a bit of a blueprint in terms of where to start and how to start building out that program of work. So it's a really valuable exercise, and appreciate you taking us through all of that. So now we'll hand it over to Nick and Jason. One of the things that I was thinking was that procurement community and the sustainable community is sustainability community is very small in Australia, and a lot of our speakers have crossed paths before. So Nick hails from Toll and Bingo, and Jason is now at Bingo, but also previously at Lion. So kind of made me think, when we're talking about leaving a legacy in a sense, it's obviously about leaving that legacy for the world, but it's also about what legacy do you leave behind in the organizations that you work with. So you can see, we'll have Lion on next, but Jason, who has spent an incredible amount of time in procurement there, was fundamental in setting up those programs. So it's really about, how do we, as we start to move around in organizations, how do we set that legacy up internally as well? So I'm going to hand it over to you both to talk about how you went about this process at Bingo.
Sure, I'll just do a very quick, Jason, I might do a quick intro because I'll dive into it quickly. But just for full disclosure, I no longer work at Bingo, but when this opportunity came up, I spoke to Jason because I initiated this work over at Bingo, and Jason has carried this and done a phenomenal job in creating the program, but also obviously accelerating the work, which is really talking about legacy, Sujata. That was something that was really pleasing for me to see how well the work that we had initiated and began has really been carried forward. So at the moment, again, I'm in between jobs, so I can really say whatever I want. So my perspectives don't reflect Bingo. So just to be very clear on that, we might jump to the next slide. I might just dive in. And I've been in sustainability for 20 years. So just I've been in sustainability for over 20 years. I'm not a procurement professional, but I've worked with procurement for well over 10 years. And I've known Tanya since my days at Optus, actually. I think that's when we first crossed paths. And I've also was feeding into the ISO 20400 through Jean-Louis, I believe it was back then. So I've been really working with ISO since it's been initiated. And I really love the process. But over at Bingo, we had some really key drivers that were really sort of driving the business towards the implementation of this, or at least to be able to consider what we're doing with implementation of a standard. And at that point in time, it was an interesting time for Bingo because Bingo was still listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, so we had a lot of investors. It's subsequently been bought out by Macquarie Infrastructure. And there was a lot of investor pressure about what are you doing in this space around sustainable procurement. Modern slavery was on the horizon. So there was a lot of questions coming from investors. And as you know, over time, the investor questions are getting sharper around these spaces. So it's really interesting to see investors actually asking pointed questions instead of just ticking a box and saying, do you do sustainable procurement? Tick. Now they're actually asking, where are your hotspots? Where are your geographies that you're working in? Where are the factories and those types of questions? Customer pressure, really key one as well for Bingo. Bingo is a B2B and a B2C, I guess, a business, but it's the B2B part that was really gaining that customer pressure. Working with some significant constructors out there who were all taking a look at this space and who are asking this, first of all, within the tender phases. So being able to demonstrate what you're doing, but also to subsequently even win further tenders, we had to be able to demonstrate how we were actually initiating social procurement. And that's another part that I know that Bingo has gone forward with and done some amazing work. So really just taking a look at how that has all really come together and those pressures starting to make us think, okay, we need to actually do something in terms of having a really good framework to be able to land sustainable procurement. It allowed us to start to really think about those compliance. I'm not going to go through every point here, by the way. I'm going to touch on a couple and then move on. But the compliance requirements, obviously critical. Modern slavery for everyone is impacted by that. But this, for me, provides such a clear framework to be able to deliver on the requirements through the Modern Slavery Act, but not just to tick the box and to create your report, but try to really generate impact and try to actually uncover instances of modern slavery, which is the whole intent of the Act. So really trying to make sure that not only are you doing it in I guess, in a really sort of authentic way, but this provides that really strong framework to be able to deliver on that. And as Tanya tried to scare everyone a couple of minutes ago, the Scope 3 emissions stuff is coming, and it's going to be very real for everyone. And as we move away from measurement of financials and saying, I spend this much with a customer, and that's great. You can do some kind of random calculated emission against a category, for example. You have to move towards more actuals, and that's going to happen. And we're going to see that actualize over the next three years, I think, or so. I think we'll really see that accelerating. Things like brand and reputation, of course, it's great for your brand. Nice to put into your sustainability report. Obviously, it shows that you've got consciousness through your CSR activities. But for me, also the risk management and the opportunity identification are really critical, and being able to sort of integrate that into your risk management, but also your opportunity realization. Again, building structure and into procurement processes, I loved as well. Procurement's already very structured, and like Tanya touched on, I didn't realise, Tanya, that there's no procurement standard. But for me, this provides a really clear way to link back into those structures that procurement provides, and to be able to drive sustainability outcomes. As a sustainability professional, that's exactly what we're looking for, is how do we actually interface with each other. And realistically, when I came to the table with this to Jason jumped all over it, and we worked very closely together from the start to really get this up and running. I'll flick to the next slide. So integration of the standards. When we decided to do it, the first thing we needed to do was understand where we were. So we did a bit of a heat map, and I know Jason will show you a little bit of a representation of that later. But literally taking a look at the actual standard itself, and scoring ourselves from 1 to 5. So 1, there's nothing in place. So you've got nothing in place versus best practice. And we worked with Edge because it's easy and hard to score yourself, because sometimes you're really super hard on yourself, I find, but sometimes you may think you've got things in place that you don't. So we actually worked with Edge to actually help us to do that, because I wanted a third party to really give us that normalization around how do you really look, because sometimes it's really hard to be able to, like I said, to self-score. So we got a heat map created, and we weren't, I guess, surprised by this, but we scored really lowly, and that was something that we knew was coming. We were prepared for it. But what that did was that allowed us then to create that gap analysis and really understand where we needed to improve. The one thing that I did do out of this that I think that it's a good call out, I think, just for the people who are listening and who may not have gone through this process, is we actually, and speaking about metrics again, we created a metric against it. And what we did was we actually implemented this metric, which was 85% against good practice. And we can explain that later if anyone's interested, or you can reach out to Jason or myself offline, more than happy to discuss it. But we actually integrated that into the business balance scorecard, which means that everyone, including all the executives, were on the hook for that, because that actually made sure that that was a gateway for payment for STIs. So I think that to be able to do that and to get the CFO to agree to that was a huge step. And I know that Jason and I had to do a little bit of a liaison to get that one over the line. But it was great, because we had a really engaged executive and were able to actually push that one through. Really importantly, you don't just go with a random metric to an executive, as you all know. We were very clear on what that roadmap was, where the gaps were, and what we were going to do to fill in those gaps, and then who was going to be responsible for that. And I'll let Jason take over from there, because that's probably enough of me for now. But I think that it's really important to understand how to initiate this process, how to really understand where to begin. And this is where all the hard work starts. And Jason, I'll let you take over from here.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, you're right. I mean, setting it up from where it was, and the initiatives that Nick put in place, I think was key, right? So coming into bingo, the procurement processes weren't necessarily great. So I think an easy or a good place to start was actually embedding it all into our processes. So having a look at our contract clauses, making sure there was elements of sustainable procurement in our contracts, updating our supplier code of conduct, making sure that it was included in there. So every time we onboarded a supplier, they were aware of the responsible procurement requirements in RFX processes. So whether we were going to RFQ, RFP, making sure that we were asking the right questions. So we wanted to know up front if the suppliers we were dealing with were actually serious about responsible procurement versus just lip service. So it gave us a really good criteria, and we put that into our scoring criteria as well. So we knew up front whether a supplier was really worth pursuing in this space, or if we needed to work with them in this space. So in some instances, we'd find a supplier that was a great supplier, but may have needed some help in this space as well. So taking them on that journey as well was part of that process. And then just whenever we engage with suppliers, making sure we always talked about responsible procurement, talked about their supply chains, where they're getting their raw materials from, making sure they're on top of all those requirements. So I think my initial thing was actually making sure it was embedded in our procurement processes. So every time we went to market, or every time we talked to a supplier, we were talking the same language, which is great. So it works really well at the moment. So everything we're doing at the moment, we make sure we include. And I mean, Nick talked about it before. We sort of chunked it down, set up a couple of working groups with Nick involved and the procurement guys, and basically met, every week or so to talk about it and make sure we're making progress on it. So next slide, please, Sujata. I guess as a result of that, so Nick talked about the rating or the scoring that we had in place, and we recently had Edge do another assessment, and we came out at 93% versus best practice. Huge increase on 2021, where we're sitting at 56%. We also received an award for Sustainability Championing at the recent SIPS Excellence in Procurement and Supply Awards this year. I kind of caveat the 93% though. So actually doing the survey that Seb did earlier and listening to Tanya prior, we still got a lot of work to do. I still think there's a lot of work in this space. So I think from a procurement point of view, I think we're doing really well. Nick talked about the CFO scorecard and the metric that we had there. I still think there's some work to do in that space. I think from a organizational strategy and linking it to the procurement strategy needs a bit of work. And I think some of the findings that Tanya and the team found pointed directly to that, which was aligning with organizational objectives and goals, and having a deeper dive into our supply chains, I think is also a real improvement area for us as well. And then our people, I think from a procurement perspective, I think we do it really well. Still in room for improvement, but I think there's a lot of people in the business who do purchasing and don't necessarily think about it. And that's about enabling them and educating them on who they purchase from and asking the right questions. Next slide.
Coach, something very, very briefly in there if I can. I think some of the great work that was done also was the differentiation between your large and your small to medium suppliers, and being able to ask relevant questions to the different cohorts, because